Niall, what's in your notes today?
Well, you're going to love this one, Robbie. You'll have some things to say. Marjorie Taylor Greene must have gone a bit too long without hitting the headlines. Yesterday, the Georgia Congresswoman decided she would put that right. She called for a pardon for Derek Chauvin. That's right, the former Minneapolis cop who murdered George Floyd on video in broad daylight 5 years ago this month. Chauvin has become quite a cause among the online right. Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson have all given voice to the idea of a pardon, or at least suggested that Chauvin suffered some grave injustice. They're all wrong. First of all, there was a reason George Floyd's killing shocked the nation, and it was because we all saw it. There it is, there are some of the images from that infamous video, disturbing though they are. At the time, it was largely uncontested that Chauvin had acted with grotesque brutality. Donald Trump was president at the time, and here's his verdict.
Express our nation's deepest condolences and most heartfelt sympathies to the family of George Floyd. A terrible event, terrible, terrible thing that happened. I've asked that the Department of Justice expedite the federal investigation into his death and do it immediately, do it as quickly as absolutely possible. It's a local situation, but we're also making it into a federal situation, and it's a terrible thing. We all saw what we saw, and it's very hard to even conceive of anything other than what we did see. Should never happen, should never be allowed to happen, a thing like that.
The following month, Trump told Sean Hannity that he had been at a meeting with sheriffs and law enforcement officers, and regarding Chauvin, quote, nobody was sticking up for what he did. The criminal complaint against Chauvin timed the duration of the cop's knee on George Floyd's neck at 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Floyd said he couldn't breathe multiple times during the encounter. After George Floyd stopped moving, Derek Chauvin didn't ease up. After George Floyd stopped breathing, Chauvin didn't ease up. So the following year, a jury convicted him of all 3 charges he faced: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. The jury, by the way, was comprised of 6 white people and 6 people who were black or multiracial. Chauvin appealed and lost again in 2023. His conviction was upheld, so was his sentence of 22.5 years. Chauvin's fans on the right are mounting a case, but they're just wrong on the facts. Greene, for example, contends that Floyd died from a drug overdose. Others have said he died of a heart attack. Both claims are rooted in a misreading of evidence, specifically of the original autopsy performed on Floyd's body. Yes, that autopsy did indeed find that George Floyd suffered from heart disease. Yes, it did find there was some fentanyl and methamphetamine in his body. But did it find that those things caused his death? No, they weren't what set it in motion. How did the pathologist in question, Dr. Andrew Baker, classify George Floyd's death? As a homicide. And what did Dr. Baker identify as the cause of that homicide? Quote, law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression, unquote. Put more simply, it was caused by Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck. Testifying at Chauvin's trial, Baker testified that the law enforcement actions were, quote, just more than Mr. Floyd could take. And other experts went even further. Here's another doctor, Martin Tobin, a nationally recognized expert on breathing and respiration, testifying at the trial.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether a person who had none of those pre-existing health conditions, a healthy person, would have died under the same circumstances as Mr. Floyd?
Yes, a healthy person subjected to what Mr. Floyd was subjected to would have died as a result of what he was subjected to.
3, 2.
And here's yet another cold, hard fact that Greene and the rest skip past. Chauvin admitted his actions when he pleaded guilty to federal civil rights charges against him. The Department of Justice noted that Chauvin, quote, admitted that he continued to use force even though he was aware that Mr. Floyd had stopped resisting, talking and moving, and even though he was aware that Mr. Floyd had lost consciousness and a pulse. Do we need it to be any more clear-cut? Quote, Chauvin admitted that his willful use of unreasonable force resulted in Mr. Floyd's bodily injury and death because his actions impaired Mr. Floyd's ability to obtain and maintain sufficient oxygen to sustain Mr. Floyd's life. Again, Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. That's why a jury of his peers convicted him. But the case was bigger than Chauvin and Floyd for a reason. It exposed how vastly different law enforcement, the justice system, and life itself can look for black Americans versus white Americans. And 5 years on, it can feel that that really hasn't changed. Who really, in the innermost honest part of themselves, thinks Marjorie Taylor Greene would be seeking a pardon for a black man who murdered a white man with a knee on his neck? Who honestly thinks that Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk or Tucker Carlson have ever had to plausibly consider a cop doing to a member of their family what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd? Nobody with any ounce of fairness or any sense of reality really believes that. If those people valued George Floyd's life, they wouldn't be rushing to defend George Floyd's murderer. A movement arose to reject their kind of thinking. It arose because it was, in fact, important to say that Black Lives Matter. And as long as we have the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, people trying to help a white cop literally get away with murder, it will still be important to say it. In 2025, no less than 2020, or any other year, black lives do indeed still matter.
Well, look, I don't disagree with you maybe as much as you expect here. I would not relitigate this case or open up a pardon. I think Derek Chauvin is morally responsible for the death of George Floyd because he broke police protocol to kneel on his neck for that length of time, and it was not necessary to do that. The car was right there. You have the handcuffs. Once you have the suspect under control, you cuff him, you put him in the car. You don't kneel on their neck for 8 minutes. He should have reasonably known that was putting this guy in a very perilous situation, and indeed it did result in his death. The medical examiner said, well, yes, there are other factors, his heart condition, fentanyl, but you're right, you introduced the video of the person saying, well, he would have, that's that person's opinion, that would have died anyway. It doesn't really matter. There can be other factors, but still he should not have done that. And so he should be punished to some degree. I think maybe you and I just have a different attitude about how long a prison sentence is appropriate for this kind of thing. I can't mind read him. I don't think he intentionally killed George Floyd. I think it was a reckless kind of conduct that he ought to have known put George Floyd at serious risk, and thus punishing him for some length of time is appropriate. I don't know that I would put it at 22 years personally. I just don't think I feel that way about it, but I wouldn't really relitigate the case. Where I do disagree, however, is in the framing of this, the widespread adopting of this as a racial issue whatsoever. It was inappropriate to do this to this person, regardless of the race of the police officer or the race of the victim. And there is no evidence, not a shred of evidence has ever been presented to demonstrate that Derek Chauvin's actions were motivated by racial animus. So I don't understand why this became the textbook example of police racism. I know there are racist police officers, just as there are racist mail delivery men and racist everything. And you can try to argue that there's more of a racial problem in policing, and we can have an argument about that. But there was nothing racial about this case to me.
I just totally disagree with that. I mean, I think that the backlash against Chauvin's conviction, for a start, as I made the point in the notes, is from people who would not dream of making the case if the races of the people were reversed. When you say there's no evidence that Derek Chauvin acted out of racial animus, no one, I don't think, is suggesting that he went on duty saying, I'm going to kill a black guy. But the argument, which I certainly would believe, is that there is a tendency among a whole swathe of society to presume criminality, to presume to some extent a less care, to believe that more rough or aggressive police action is necessary when the person being apprehended is black. And so Derek Chauvin, for the record, had, I believe, 18 complaints against him before the George Chauvin case ever arose. So the idea that we can just pretend that this wasn't a racial case. I just don't believe that. We just fundamentally disagree. On the point of sentencing, he was convicted of murder. I don't think that 22 and a half years is excessive for murder, particularly in those cases. The actual charge of second-degree unintentional murder talks about exactly the point you raised. It does not require premeditation. It requires someone to be killed while another felony is taking place, the felony here being an assault on George Floyd. So I don't have any problem with the sentencing.
Next up, social media has a field day with Don Lemon's latest meltdown. You won't want to miss it.